let's get started with today's session on running finance and procurement as one. Topic is integrating SAP S/4HANA with Zycus. My name is Martin Stoyanov. I'm part of Rojo Integrations. And in today's session, we're going to discuss how to actually make finance and procurement run as one connected process. And even though this might seem as a concept to seem simple, we will review that there are some challenges associated with doing this from an operational perspective. And as you can see from the title, to demonstrate this, we were going to use Zycus and S/4HANA. Zycus is one of the leading procurement platforms, and S/4HANA is one of the most widely used enterprise ERPs out there. So now let's take a quick look at what we have as a detailed agenda for today's session. First, we're going to start with some general trends of the digital landscape in 2026. We're going to review the environment that most of the modern organizations operate in. Then we're going to do a short intro of Rojo and Zycus and the partnership between the two companies, what we've achieved in the past and what is the mutual goal that together we're working towards. Afterwards, we're going to discuss why procurement and finance actually need to operate as one. And then we're going to move to the more practical part of the webinar where we're going to discuss what are the different options to integrate Zycus with SAP and what is the pre-built integration that Rojo provides as part of the partnership with Zycus. At the end, we're wrapping up with a customer story and the Q&A session. But if you have some questions, comments, remarks throughout the session, feel free to share those either in the Q&A section or in the chat of the meeting. Starting with a quick overview of Rojo as a company. Here on the slide, you can see part of Rojo's adapter portfolio. Of course, the highlight of today's session is Zycus, but we're using this to illustrate that Rojo as a company does enterprise integration. We're well embedded into the SAP ecosystem due to our partnership with SAP. What our partnership entails is that we as a company, we are the company that develops the standard connectivity between SAP and non-SAP systems. There are a lot more adapters which are on our roadmap. Today we're going to focus on Zycus, but the good thing to illustrate here is that we support multiple enterprise integration, multiple enterprise applications, and their integration use cases with SAP. It's important to realize that overall integration in general is no longer a project by project customization. We're no longer dealing with direct point-to-point integrations. In order to stay competitive in the demanding digital landscape of today, we must standardize, we must align with the best practices in enterprise integration, and therefore we're going to share some of these later on. A couple of words about Rojo and Zycus, what our partnership essentially is. We started collaborating 2.5 years ago, and we actually built in collaboration between Rojo and Zycus a pre-built integration which enables organizations to have a quick way to accelerate the integration between Zycus and an SAP backend. Of course, we're going to discuss this in detail as we proceed with the slides, but it's good for the audience to know that this has been an ongoing partnership, and Rojo brings SAP expertise, while Zycus brings a lot of expertise in procurement, in AI spend management, and so on. Now, taking a quick look at what is the actually the landscape that we all operate in. Here on this slide, we see multiple logos, and we also see a couple of statements. Essentially, what we're trying to illustrate here is that the modern enterprise nowadays operates more than 1,000 applications. We have these applications running in a hybrid landscape, meaning some of the applications are on-premise, others are in the cloud, all kinds of hybrid settings. There are a lot of updates happening on these applications. There's a lot of data which is being generated. Essentially, there's a metric saying here that the data that all these applications produce is growing by 25% year over year. So what this means is that all these concepts around the modern digital landscape actually make integration more difficult. We have also expectations by both the business and the end customers shifting from the previously known batch updates to real-time integration. All the expectations around latency are now down to seconds. Everything needs to happen at the exact moment when a certain message is triggered. So these are a host of challenges that are brought to the modern enterprises. And in order for them to stay competitive, they need to think about integration as an enabler of digital transformation and not just as a technical challenge that needs to be solved. So what we as a company try to focus on, try to highlight in front of customers and partners is that actually if you have an integration strategy which takes into account all those different challenges, you can actually become a more competitive and more successful organization in the future, essentially future-proofing your overall integration landscape. Now that we've seen what is the environment that modern organizations operate in, let's take a quick look at what this means for the SAP world in particular. I would assume that a lot of the audience here is running some SAP systems in their digital landscape. What we see here is essentially a timeline which shows the time period between 2025 and 2030, in which a lot of changes are happening in the SAP world. We have the end of life of SAP ECC, we have the end of life of SAP Neo, and we have the end of life of SAP PO. What this means is that even if an organization has previously integrated, as an example, their Zycus platform with SAP ERP, like SAP ECC, via SAP PO, now that these transformations are happening, they actually need to redo this whole integration layer. They need to switch the middleware, moving from SAP PO to a modern middleware technology, like for example, SAP CI, and they also need to migrate off the older SAP ERP ECC to SAP S/4HANA. And we see that the majority of the companies are yet to actually do this migration. The data that we show here is from the beginning of 2025, where we could see that about 60% of all SAP customers were still running ECC. What we're going to discuss in the following slides is a pre-built integration, which is natively built for SAP BTP and SAP S/4HANA. However, if there are use cases for ECC integration with Zycus as well, the pre-built integration package that we're going to discuss in more detail will also be quite helpful. Moving on to essentially wrapping up the first part of the webinar, which is trying to set the stage, explain where the digital landscape is going, what are the different SAP transformations, with one quote that we have put here in the slide. So essentially, when we see all these new developments, the data growing, the number of applications growing, all the different SAP changes that are happening in the world, we can safely conclude that even if every part of the digital landscape is changing, one constant remains. And this constant is that all the parts from the digital landscape need to stay connected to one another. It doesn't matter how good the features and how strong a certain individual platform is. What matters is how well this platform works with the rest of the digital landscape. And this is in particular very important for procurement and finance, both very important processes for the overall financial transformation as part of the digital transformation. So in the next slides, we're going to review in more detail what it means to have finance and procurement running as a single process and how you can actually achieve this using Zycus and S/4HANA as examples for this integration. Taking a quick look at a comparison between having procurement and finance run as a connected process and having procurement and finance run as separate processes, essentially running in silos. The reason why spend management platforms like Zycus, for example, exist is that they're quite agile, while the ERP remains the source of truth. If we look at the if we look at if we look closely at Zycus, for example, Zycus is built so procurement teams can move fast, while ERP remains the system of record. And if you run these two systems in silos, then there is a widening gap that can slow everything down. With if you have such an integration, what you can achieve is actually have a real-time flow of the data. Imagine that you have 100% real-time 24/7 sync between your supplier information, between your POs, between your invoices, all your payment data. Everything is being synced between the two systems, and you can actually run your invoicing or procurement process in one system, but have the data being replicated in the other system. This can enable you to have better reporting. It can enable you to reduce the manual work. It can enable you to effectively reduce the operating costs of running the two platforms, and essentially bring you a more consistent, reliable process for everything related to financial transactions and for procurement altogether. On top of this, also all your reporting, auditing processes can become easier, and essentially your procurement and finance teams can be freed up from these manual tasks and being able to focus on what actually matters, which is the core business processes associated with finance and procurement, and not chasing duplicated data or doing some manual checks on those POs. And this is where we can actually, as an organization, realize significant value from having such an integration. Taking a look at what actually we mean by having an integration between Zycus and S/4HANA. On this slide, we have one simple diagram at the bottom of the slide, showcasing a source system, S/4HANA, and a target system, Zycus, with adapter and content written on top of the SAP CPI, SAP BTP platform. One clarification here is that with SAP BTP, we mean SAP Business Technology Platform, and with SAP CPI, we mean the middleware component of SAP BTP. So essentially, what we're showcasing here is a diagram where you have data replication between your SAP backend and your Zycus platform, and this data is being replicated on top of your SAP middleware. This is a best practice recommended not only by Rojo, but also by SAP, because a lot of the customers that have an SAP backend, be it ECC or mostly S/4HANA nowadays, they would also have SAP BTP as a platform. So what this means is that you do not have to invest in other middleware technology. You would already be using what is in your tech stack, in your digital landscape, so you can essentially realize better return on investment. How this works from a technical perspective, we see two components in the upper part of the slides. This is the Zycus Adapter and the Zycus Integration Content. Both components are needed to establish the end-to-end data replication and the connectivity between the two platforms. The adapter, this is what establishes the connectivity. This is what allows you to discover all the different APIs of the Zycus platform, and it is developed natively on SAP BTP, so it follows all the best practices for connectivity which are recommended by SAP. The integration content, on the other hand, this is the replication of the business process. If you think, for example, of a scenario where you need to replicate a purchase order between the two systems, all the different replication steps, all the mapping activities in order to replicate a purchase order from one system to the other, this is covered in the integration content. And here it's important to share that the integration content, it's not let's say a fixed, closed kind of an integration flow. This is a fully customizable iFlow on SAP BTP. in order to cater for an organization-specific SAP settings or Zycus setting or any custom logic. You can also have another system in between. For example, we've seen use cases where the users from Zycus are being replicated into SAP SuccessFactors, for example. So via our Zycus adapter, you could also include other systems uh, in this diagram, in this architecture solution. So once again, to summarize, in order to establish the end-to-end connectivity between SAP S/4HANA and Zycus, you would need two software components, both of these components running on SAP BTP. So now that we have reviewed what it means to actually integrate the two systems, let's move on and see how this works in practice. Because so far we've discussed what are the technical components of the solution. So now let's take a look at what is it that Zycus and Rojo actually offer to the public. What we have is called Zycus and S/4HANA integration package. It consists of the two software components that we saw on the previous slides and also a package of services. In order for a customer to get end-to-end integration between the two platforms, you do not only need the software, you also need to match this software to your specific requirements, to your specific business logic, essentially enhancing the software or enabling, you can also call it implementation, in order for you to get the end-to-end connectivity between the two systems. As in every other software implementation project, we also have here as steps integration testing, user acceptance testings, and go live and hypercare support. So what we try to offer by default to our customers is a comprehensive package which covers all the different integration steps in order for you to run Zycus and S/4HANA as a single system. We also see a couple of KPIs here. For example, the project duration is 6 to 8 weeks. We're going to discuss this in more detail in the next slide. But overall, the main goal is to have an accelerated integration project and being able to get the value from the Zycus platform as quickly as possible. And as I mentioned, KPIs, these are the KPIs that we wanted to bring to the attention of the audience today. These are relevant for Zycus and S/4HANA integration project, but they are also relevant for any other integration project. Reason for this is that using integration content is, as I said earlier, a best practice recommended also by SAP. It's not only Rojo that claims that using integration content can greatly accelerate your integration project. This is essentially a best practice recommended by SAP. If you think about, for example, a typical integration project where you would start with gathering certain requirements, researching what needs to be built, then actually building these integration flows, testing, implementing for the first time, this can easily take more than 6 months. However, if you take a comprehensive, essentially ready integration template, you're not starting from scratch. You're starting from, let's say, 80% of the journey already done, because all the different data replication mapping steps have been accounted for, have been taken care of in the existing integration content. So what you need to do is essentially enhance it and make sure that it is being set up as per your existing custom logic. In the middle, we also see 0 to 60. This is a metric coming directly from SAP via multiple implementations of integration content. SAP have estimated that if you're using integration content in comparison to starting from scratch, you can realize 60% lower total cost of ownership for an integration project. And of course, at the bottom, we also see one other important aspect, which is that all these best practices that we're sharing, this overall approach of using adapter, integration content, essentially checking for pre-built components before you start building from scratch, is actually aligned with the SAP Clean Core principles of decoupling the integrations and making sure that any customizations happen in the middleware layer and not in your SAP backend. So on this slide, we saw what are the important KPIs, the important indicators for success in such a project. Now let's take also a quick look at how comprehensive the existing integration package is. What we see here is a combination of master and transactional data interfaces. Essentially, this is the current existing standard integration package between Zycus and S/4HANA. Here you can see that from chart of account, we cover majority of the interfaces. We also have important interfaces which are present in almost every implementation, like supplier, invoice, purchase order, and of course the adapter at the bottom. So what we're trying to show here is that the standard package that we have already built is covering a lot of the integration scenarios that are typically needed in a project between Zycus and S/4HANA. But then again, as I said, every customer is different. So if there is a custom requirement, we usually approach this from the perspective of doing a fit gap analysis. Essentially, we would compare what is available out of the box in this integration package to what is the particular scope of the customer, identify any gaps, and whatever is lacking, we would be able to build custom. But of course, this is a case-by-case basis. And also taking a quick look at an example project timeline. I already shared in the previous slides that we usually have a certain integration, an integration project between Zycus and S/4HANA run on average for 6 weeks. Here we see an example of 8 weeks, but this also covers the handover and the go live support. So this is essentially an example project timeline. This varies from customer to customer, but if we have a situation where the customer has clear requirements, clear integration scope, they have functional support on the SAP side, then you can easily realize an average integration scope in this amount of weeks. Essentially, if you keep your processes quite standard, if there are no separate hops to other systems, to other applications, you can even lower this example project timeline. And I think for any integration colleagues in the session, if you think about the particular integration project, you can easily draw the comparison that usually takes a lot more time to integrate the platform with the SAP backend. Now that we have seen the example project timelines, let us take a quick look at one customer example. We've had numerous successful implementations of the solution. Here we are sharing one example of a global audit and tax company which integrated Zycus with S/4HANA. They had some requirements which were, for example, to accelerate the time to value from the Zycus platform. They wanted to achieve 100% real-time data exchange between the Zycus platform and their SAP backend, and they wanted to not start from scratch, essentially accelerating the time to value and accelerating the overall integration project. What we managed to achieve is integrate 19 interfaces between their SAP backend and Zycus, achieve, of course, the 100% real-time data share between their platform, between the Zycus platform and SAP. And in this particular example, it was 75% out-of-the-box connectivity. As I mentioned previously, the last 25 or 20% are actually saved for the enhancements, for the needed customizations in order to run this end-to-end integration. So this wraps up the core part of the webinar. Now, as a conclusion, I would also like to showcase one quick demo. Essentially, what we're going to look at here is a return on investment tool that we have on our website. So I will just reshare my screen and show you what you can do by visiting Rojo's website. The main goal is, of course, for you to be able to make a comparison between how much would it take in terms of effort, in terms of cost for you to build something from scratch in comparison to using pre-built interfaces like the ones that we have available. So I hope that my screen is visible now. We are currently on Rojo's website. What we see here is the so-called return of investment calculator, We have selected Zycus as a platform that we would like to integrate. And now we're going to select a couple of integration scenarios to make a calculation of what will be the time savings in terms of time and in terms of cost. So let's say, for example, that we would like to integrate suppliers. It is usually part of all the implementations that we do. We would also like to include two interfaces from chart of account. Let's say, for example, cost center and profit center. And we would also like to have one transactional data interface, like, for example, general ledger-based invoices. We select these interfaces, and now you would see that it is automatically estimated that the delivery time for building these interfaces from scratch would be 26 weeks. However, if you use the pre-built scenarios and the pre-built adapter that Rojo offers, this would be decreased to 3 weeks, which is quite a substantial difference. And in terms of cost savings, we have used some standard hourly rates, and you would see that you would be able to save over 70,000 euros if you use Rojo integration content in comparison from building something from scratch. You could also select, for example, not using the enablement services, not getting these customizations done from Rojo. Then, of course, the time to value would increase a bit, but it would still bring a lot of benefits towards the overall project. As I said, this solution was natively built for SAP S/4HANA. However, it can be used for ECC as well, with a bit more considerations, meaning that for ECC you can use these integration flows as templates, not as end-to-end running flows. So this is the small demo that we wanted to show to you. This ROI calculator on our website is freely available. If you would like to check for yourself what this could mean for your particular integration scenarios, feel free to do so. You could also just check for other applications. We also, as a company, focus on, for example, CRM integration with an SAP backend. So you could indeed check for yourself what this would mean, for example, if you would like to integrate Salesforce with S/4HANA. I'll just bring my presentation again in the screen here so we can wrap up with the Q&A section. Just a second. Let's see if this works. As we're almost at the finishing part of the presentation, let me pick up from where we left off. At the end of the presentation, okay. Couple of closing remarks from our side. If you would like to connect with Rojo, if you would like us to help you with some tailored advice for your procurement transformation journey or your SAP journey, or in general your integration journey, feel free to contact us directly through our website. You can scan the QR code which was visible a second ago. Let me bring it up again. Yes, feel free to scan the QR code in order to connect with us. And also you can take a look at our webinars library on demand. Essentially, this is a collection of all the previous webinars that we've done on different integration topics. It covers topics like, for example, SAP integration modernization to particular applications being integrated with SAP, and it is a great resource for you to review more on integration best practices and how you can future-proof your integration landscape. And with this, I see we're right at 4:30. We're wrapping up the session. If you have any questions, feel free to put them now in the chat or in the Q&A section. Or if you want, you can also reach out to us separately after the session and get your questions answered. I'll just take a quick look at the chat in the Q&A section, see if something is coming in. I don't see any questions coming in, so I hope this means the session was quite clear. And with that, I would like to thank you all for participating and wish you a nice day or a nice afternoon or a nice evening ahead. Thank you for joining. And if you have questions related to your integration journey, feel free to reach out to us. Thank you.